The phone screen glows in the dark. 2 blue check marks. The message was read 3 days ago. You sit there in the blue light of midnight, scrolling back through the conversation thread, as if rereading your own words might reveal the mistake you made. Was it the tone, the timing, the assumption of familiarity? Your thumb hovers over the keyboard, composing and deleting apologies for crimes you cannot name. The silence between you and them has become a room you cannot leave, 4 walls built from 2 small ticks of confirmation that they saw your words and chose not to answer. This is the waiting room of digital communication, a place where minutes feel like hours and hours feel like verdicts. The mind, in its desperate need for narrative, begins writing stories. They are angry, they are indifferent, they have moved on, they never cared at all. The silence becomes a mirror, but instead of reflecting them, it reflects every insecurity you have ever held about your own worth. The unanswered message transforms from a simple text into evidence of something darker, that you are too much, or perhaps not enough, that your presence in someone's life is optional, forgettable, easily set aside. You tell yourself it does not matter. You tell yourself you do not care. But your hand keeps reaching for the phone, checking, refreshing, as if the compulsive gesture might summon a response from the void. The silence is not merely the absence of words. It is the presence of questions that have no answers, the unbearable ambiguity of a conversation stopped mid-breath. Somewhere across the city, across the world, perhaps in the next room, the person who has not replied sits in their own kind of darkness. Their phone rests on the table like a brick, like something heavy and demanding. The notification still glows there, unread or read, but unanswered, a small red number that represents not possibility, but obligation. They have seen your name appear on the screen. They have felt the familiar tightening in their chest, the way their shoulders tense at the sight of another message added to the accumulating pile of things they must do, must answer, must attend to. They want to reply. This is the truth that the waiting person cannot see. They have composed responses in their mind while showering, while walking, while lying awake at 3 a.m. They have imagined the conversation, planned the words, felt the relief of resolution, but there is a distance between intention and action that for them has become a canyon they cannot cross. The message sits there, a small rectangle of light, demanding something they cannot give, not because they do not care, but because caring itself has become exhausting. They are not avoiding you. They are avoiding the feeling that rises when they open the conversation, the weight of expectation, the performance of presence, the energy required to translate the chaos of their inner world into coherent sentences that will not worry you, will not burden. You will not reveal the extent to which they are barely holding themselves together. To reply is to step into a role they are too tired to play. To reply is to pretend they are fine when they are not fine. To reply is to give from a well that has run dry. So they scroll past. They tell themselves they will answer later when they have more energy, more clarity, more of themselves to offer. Later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. And with each passing day, the weight of the unanswered message grows heavier, and the shame of not answering becomes another reason they cannot bring themselves to begin. 2 people separated by silence, each trapped in their own private suffering. The one who waits, interpreting the quiet as rejection. The one who is silent, drowning in a fatigue that has no name. Between them, the unanswered message hangs in digital space like a question mark, like an accusation, like a failure of connection in a world that promises connection at every moment. But what if this silence is not what we think it is? What if the absence of a reply is not a statement about you at all, but a symptom of something deeper? An invisible struggle playing out behind the screen, a psychological phenomenon as common as it is, misunderstood. What if the person who has not answered is not cruel or careless, but simply human, overwhelmed by the very technology that promised to bring us all closer together? There is a name for this paralysis. There is a reason for this retreat. And understanding it requires us to step out of our own narrative of abandonment and into the hidden landscape of a mind under siege. Not from you, not from your message, but from the relentless demand to be always available, always responsive, always performing the self for an audience that never sleeps. The silence is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a different one, a story about what it means to be human in an age of instant everything, about the cost of constant connection, and about the quiet mercy of learning to interpret the pause, not as rejection, but as a plea for understanding. There is relief in naming things. When the shapeless anxiety that lives in your chest finally receives a name, it becomes something you can hold, examine, understand. The silence that stretches between sent and unsent messages is not a character flaw. It is not rudeness masquerading as forgetfulness, not arrogance disguised as busy schedules. It has a name in the language of psychology. Several names, in fact: response, paralysis, communication, burnout, the fatigue of perpetual availability. To name it is to acknowledge that it exists, that it is real, that thousands of people at this very moment are staring at their phones, feeling the exact same paralysis, the same inexplicable inability to do something as simple as typing a few words and pressing send. The person who has not replied to you is not alone in their struggle. They are part of an invisible epidemic of exhaustion, a generation drowning in the demand to be constantly reachable, constantly responsive, constantly performing connection. In a world that never stops talking, the need to sometimes stop listening is not pathology. It is survival. Think of it this way. Every person carries within them an emotional battery, a reservoir of social and cognitive energy that powers their ability to engage with the world. Every interaction draws from this battery, every conversation, every decision, every act of translation between internal feeling and external expression. For some people, this battery is vast, recharged easily by the very interactions that drain it. These are the ones who reply instantly, who seem to effortlessly maintain dozens of conversations simultaneously, who draw energy from connection rather than spending it. But for others, the battery is smaller, or it recharges more slowly, or it has been depleted by invisible demands that others cannot see. Each message that arrives is not an opportunity for connection, but a withdrawal from an already overdrawn account. Each notification is not a pleasant surprise, but another task added to a list that already feels impossible. The phone does not offer them the world. It offers them proof that they are failing to keep up with it. When this battery runs low, the mind begins to ration energy with ruthless efficiency. It performs a kind of triage, sorting the urgent from the important, from the optional. And here is the painful truth that the waiting person must understand: your message, no matter how thoughtful, no matter how much you matter to them, may be sorted into the category of things that can wait. Not because you are unimportant, but because responding to you requires a kind of energy they simply do not have. It requires them to be coherent when they feel fragmented, to be present when they are barely holding on, to offer you a version of themselves that feels honest rather than performative. The silence is not rejection. It is the nervous system's way of enforcing a boundary that the conscious mind cannot articulate. It is the body saying, what the mouth cannot: I need rest, I need space, I need to not be needed for a moment. In a culture that has not taught us how to say I am at capacity, silence becomes the only language available for communicating our limits. This is not a moral failing. This is not a generational weakness, not the death of courtesy, not evidence of societal decay. This is what happens when human beings with their ancient nervous systems, designed for small tribes and face-to-face interaction, are suddenly expected to maintain intimate connection with dozens or hundreds of people, simultaneously across time zones and contexts, without pause, without rest, without ever being allowed to simply be unavailable. The emotional battery metaphor gives us permission to understand what our bodies already know: that there is a cost to constant connection, that energy is finite, that sometimes doing nothing is not laziness but conservation. When someone does not reply, they are not always choosing to ignore you. Sometimes they are simply running on reserves so low that even the smallest act of communication feels like climbing a mountain with no rope, no rest, no summit in sight. And perhaps most importantly, understanding this changes the question we ask. Instead of "why haven't they replied to me?" we might ask, what might be draining their battery that I cannot see? This shift from personal interpretation to compassionate curiosity is the first step toward bridging the silence with something other than resentment or despair. But what exactly drains this battery? What are the invisible forces that turn a simple text message into an impossible task? The answer is not singular. There are many thieves of energy, many reasons why the fingers freeze above the keyboard, why the message remains in the draft folder of the mind, but never makes it to the screen. 5 patterns emerge again and again, 5 psychological landscapes where communication becomes paralysis. The first is the prison of perfectionism, the anxious mind that cannot settle on the right words. You see the message, you know you should reply, you even want to reply. But the moment you begin to type, a critical voice awakens. Is this tone too casual or too formal? Does this emoji seem insincere? Will they misinterpret this phrase? The delete button becomes your most used key. You write a sentence, read it back, hear it in their voice, imagine their reaction, decide it sounds wrong, and erase it. You start again, and again, and again. This is not overthinking. This is the terror of being misunderstood, of having your words stripped of your facial expressions, your vocal inflections, the warmth of your physical presence, land wrong, and create a rift you never intended. Text is a minefield for the anxious mind. Every period might seem too harsh. Every exclamation point might seem too eager. The absence of immediate feedback means you are performing without an audience's reactions to guide you, speaking into a void, and hoping your meaning survives the translation from thought to text. So you wait for the perfect response to arrive, fully formed, the sentence that will communicate exactly what you mean, with no room for misinterpretation. But perfect never comes. The longer you wait, the higher the stakes become, until the simple act of replying feels like defusing a bomb with words. Eventually, paralyzed by the impossible standard you have set, you close the app and tell yourself you will try again later when your mind is clearer. Later never arrives. The perfect response remains unwritten, because perfect is not a destination, but a horizon that recedes with every step you take toward it. The second thief is sensory and social overload, the nervous system pushed beyond its capacity to process. Imagine standing in a room where 100 conversations are happening simultaneously, where the lights are too bright and the music too loud, and every surface vibrates with noise. This is what the digital world feels like to some people, not occasionally, but constantly. The phone is not a tool, but a portal through which the entire world pours in, without filter, without pause, without mercy. For the highly sensitive, for the deeply introverted, for those whose nervous systems are tuned to perceive every subtle shift in tone and energy, each message carries not just information, but emotional weight. They feel the expectation behind your words, the needs you have not stated, the relationship maintenance that every exchange requires. A simple, "How are you?" is not simple at all. It is an invitation to perform wellness, to package their complex inner state into something digestible and appropriate to manage your potential worry or disappointment if they tell the truth. By the time they have scrolled through a dozen messages, their system is overloaded. The notifications pile up like physical objects in a small room, each one demanding attention, each one a thread they must pick up and weave into coherent response. The silence is not avoidance. It is retreat, the nervous system's desperate attempt to find quiet in a world that offers none. They are not hiding from you. They are hiding from the accumulated noise of 100 small interactions that, taken together, become a roar they cannot withstand. The third thief is conflict avoidance, the heart that cannot face what the message represents. Not every message is neutral. Some arrive carrying uncomfortable questions, difficult requests, topics that require confrontation or decision, or emotional labor that feels beyond current capacity. The message sits there, a small bomb of potential discomfort, and the mind does what it has learned to do: postpone the explosion. They are not avoiding you. They are avoiding the feeling your message evokes. Maybe you have asked them to make a decision when they are drowning in indecision. Maybe you have raised a topic they need to think about, but do not have the mental space to process. Maybe your message requires them to set a boundary they do not know how to articulate, to say no when they have spent a lifetime being unable to refuse. The silence is not passive aggression. It is the space between impulse and action, the pause before the difficult conversation they do not yet have the strength to begin. So they tell themselves they will reply when they have figured out what to say, when they have gathered the courage, when they feel more equipped to handle the emotional complexity your message demands. But that moment of readiness keeps slipping further away, and the message remains unanswered, not from cruelty, but from a fear so deep they cannot name it. The fear of confrontation, of disappointing you, of revealing their own limitations. The fourth thief is the most invisible, and perhaps the most devastating: the complete depletion of spirit that comes with depression, grief, or profound exhaustion. There is a state of being where even the smallest tasks become monumental, where brushing your teeth feels like an achievement and getting out of bed requires heroic effort. In this state, the idea of crafting a coherent message, of being responsive and present and socially appropriate, is not just difficult, it is impossible. The well is empty. There is nothing left to draw from. Every ounce of energy is being used simply to exist, to breathe, to survive another hour. The message you sent is not ignored, it is seen, it is registered, it might even be appreciated. But responding to it requires a self they do not currently have access to, a version of themselves that can think clearly and feel appropriately and translate internal chaos into words that will not alarm you. They know you are waiting. This knowledge adds to the weight they carry, but does not give them the strength to lift it. In the fog of depression, time moves strangely. A day feels like a week collapses into a blur. They lose track of how long it has been, how many messages have gone unanswered, how many small failures have accumulated into a mountain of shame they cannot climb. The silence is not a choice. It is a symptom, a sign of an inner winter where nothing grows, where everything is survival, where connection feels like a language they have forgotten how to speak. And then there is the fifth thief, the one that feeds on itself, the spiral of shame that makes silence self-perpetuating. One day passes without a reply, and they feel a twinge of guilt. 3 days pass, and the guilt becomes significant. A week passes, and now the guilt has transformed into shame, and shame demands a response worthy of the delay. They cannot simply say sorry for the late reply anymore. They need an explanation, a justification, a reason that will make sense of their absence without revealing how much they have been struggling. But no explanation feels adequate. No words seem sufficient to bridge the gap their silence has created. So they wait, hoping inspiration will strike, hoping the perfect apology will arrive. Instead, more time passes and the shame deepens, and the gap widens, until replying feels not like reconnection, but like emerging from hiding to face judgment. The longer they wait, the harder it becomes to break the silence, until the silence itself becomes a wall neither person knows how to climb. Understanding the mechanisms of silence is one thing. Reinterpreting its meaning is another. Because once you see the paralysis for what it is, not rejection but protection, not indifference but overwhelm, the silence begins to tell a different story. It becomes not an ending but a communication in itself, a message written in the language of absence, a boundary drawn by a system too exhausted to use words. When someone cannot say "I need space," their nervous system says it for them. The silence is an unconscious boundary, a line drawn not with intention, but with instinct, the body's ancient wisdom asserting itself when the conscious mind cannot find the language. It is the same mechanism that makes you pull your hand away from fire before you have time to think about it. The same survival instinct that shuts down non-essential systems when resources are scarce. The person who has not replied is not making a calculated decision to exclude you. They are being protected by their own biology from a depletion so complete it would leave them with nothing. This is not conscious strategy. This is the organism choosing survival over social performance, choosing preservation over pretense. And there is a strange mercy in this, if you can learn to see it, the mercy of a system that knows when to stop, that refuses to give what is not there to give, that protects the person, even from their own impulse to please, to perform to, maintain connection at the cost of their own collapse. The boundary may be invisible to you, but it is real. And respecting it even when you do not understand it, even when it hurts to be on the outside of it, is an act of love. To allow someone their silence is to trust that they are doing what they need to do to survive, even if their survival temporarily means distance from you. But there is another interpretation, one that seems paradoxical at first. Sometimes, silence is not absence of care, but evidence of it. Sometimes the person who does not reply immediately is the person who cares too much about their reply to offer you something half-formed, rushed, inadequate. They have read your message, felt its weight, understood that it deserves more than a quick acknowledgement fired off between meetings. They want to give you their full attention, their considered thoughts, the response your words deserve. So they wait. They wait for the right moment, the clear head, the emotional space to engage properly. They compose responses in their mind during quiet moments, saving them for when they can sit down and write them out with care. But life intervenes. The perfect moment never arrives. The clear head is obscured by new urgencies. And in the gap between intention and execution, days pass, and the response they meant to write with such thoughtfulness becomes the response they are now too ashamed to write at all. This is the tragedy of respect. Without communication, the person who honors you enough to want to reply perfectly ends up not replying at all. The very care they feel becomes the obstacle to expressing it. And you, waiting on the other end, have no way of knowing that their silence is not dismissal, but its opposite, not evidence that you matter too little, but that you matter so much they could not bear to offer you anything less than their best. For the person who is waiting, this reframing requires a fundamental shift in perspective. It requires stepping outside the story your wounded self is telling, the story where you are forgotten, where you are optional, where you are too much or not enough, and into a larger truth. The silence is rarely about you. It is almost never a judgment of your worth. It is a reflection of their inner world, their capacity, their struggle, their humanity. This does not make the waiting easier. Understanding why someone cannot reply does not fill the absence their silence creates. But it does change the nature of the waiting. Instead of waiting for a verdict, you are simply waiting for a person to find their way back to themselves, back to the energy required to connect. And in that reinterpretation, there is room for something other than resentment. There is room for compassion, for patience, for the recognition that everyone you meet is fighting battles you cannot see. The question shifts. It requires stepping outside the story your wounded self is telling, the story where you are forgotten, where you are optional, where you are too much or not enough, and into a larger truth. The silence is rarely about you. It is almost never a judgment of your worth. It is a reflection of their inner world, their capacity, their struggle, their humanity. This does not make the waiting easier. Understanding why someone cannot reply does not fill the absence their silence creates, but it transforms that pain from a wound inflicted to a shared experience of the human difficulty of connection in an age that makes true connection harder, with every notification, every message, every demand to be always on, always available, always responding. Understanding is necessary but not sufficient. Compassion without action remains abstract. A beautiful sentiment that changes nothing in the lived experience of waiting or being paralyzed. There are friendships that pick up exactly where they left off after years of quiet, as if no time has passed at all. The quality of connection is not determined by its continuity, but by its truth, not by its speed, but by its substance. A single conversation where you are truly seen and heard matters more than 100 exchanges of small talk, more than 1,000 messages that say nothing at all. This is easy to forget in the age of instant everything. Not what did I do wrong, but what might they be carrying. Not why don't they care, but what if they care so much that responding feels impossible right now. Not am I unimportant, but what if their silence has nothing to do with my importance and everything to do with their capacity. This shift does not erase the pain of being left waiting. It is the weight that keeps you pinned in place, the voice that tells you that because you have already failed to reply promptly, you have failed completely, and there is no point in trying now. But this is a lie the mind tells when it is tired. Your worth is not determined by your response time. Your value to the people who care about you is not measured in the speed of your messages. The paralysis you feel is not a moral failing. Once the shame begins to lift, space opens for a different approach. You do not have to craft the perfect response. You do not have to wait until you have the energy for a full conversation. There is profound power in what might be called the placeholder message, the brief acknowledgement that says, I have seen this, I care, I am not able to engage fully right now, but I will. The exact words matter less than the act of sending them. A simple, I got your message, thank you. I'm a bit overwhelmed at the moment, but I want to reply properly when I have more bandwidth releases both of you from the limbo of silence. This small act accomplishes something crucial. It transforms the silence from ambiguity into clarity, from a question mark into a period followed by a comma. The other person knows they have been heard. You know you have acknowledged them. The weight of the unanswered message lifts slightly, and the shame spiral is interrupted before it can deepen. You have not solved the underlying exhaustion, but you have communicated around it, and communication is the bridge that keeps connection alive even when energy is low. And if even this feels like too much in certain relationships, there is permission in naming your pattern before it becomes a problem. I'm a bit overwhelmed at the moment, but I want to reply properly when I have more bandwidth releases both of you from the limbo of silence. This small act accomplishes something crucial. It transforms the silence from ambiguity into clarity, from a question mark into a period followed by a comma. The other person knows they have been heard. You know you have acknowledged them. The weight of the unanswered message lifts slightly, and the shame spiral is interrupted before it can deepen. For the person who is waiting, the path forward requires a different kind of work. The discipline of rewriting the story your mind tells while the hours stretch into days. When the notification does not come, when the silence extends beyond what feels reasonable, your mind will generate narratives. This is what minds do. They fill voids with meaning, emptiness with explanation. but the explanations your anxious mind generates, that you have been rejected, forgotten, deemed unworthy, are almost always wrong. Practice the 90-10 rule. Assume that 90% of the time, their silence is about their internal state, their capacity, their struggles. Only 10% of the time is it actually about you. Make this your default assumption, not because it is always true, but because defaulting to compassion serves you better than defaulting to hurt. When you catch yourself spiraling into "they must hate me," interrupt the pattern. Ask instead, what might they be dealing with that I cannot see? This is not denial. This is choosing a more generous interpretation when you have no evidence for the cruel one. And if the matter is truly urgent, if the silence is creating real problems rather than just uncomfortable feelings, there is power in changing the medium. Text is a wonderful tool for convenience, but a terrible tool for urgency and nuance. A voice call carries warmth that text cannot. It removes the pressure of crafting perfect written words. It allows for real-time clarification for tone, to convey what emojis cannot, for the humanity of breath and pause and vocal inflection, to do the work that letters on a screen struggle to accomplish. The gentle nudge is also an option, not the guilt-laden "why haven't you replied," but the compassionate "hey, just following up on my last message, no rush, just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost." This offers them an exit ramp from their paralysis, a way back into the conversation that does not require them to explain or justify their absence. We live in an era that has conflated speed with care, immediacy with intimacy, constant availability with genuine connection. The blue check marks and read receipts were designed to bring us closer, to eliminate the uncertainty of whether our words reach their destination. But they have created a new kind of tyranny, the expectation that being seen means being answered, that being read means being understood, that connection can be measured in minutes, elapsed between message and reply. But the human heart does not operate on the same clock as the smartphone. The soul does not run on notifications. And the depth of a relationship cannot be calculated by counting the hours between texts or measuring the frequency of contact. Some of the deepest bonds are held not by constant communication, but by the trust that survives the silence, the certainty that distance, temporal or physical, does not equal disconnection. There are people you have not spoken to in months who would still answer if you called at 3 a.m. There are friendships that pick up exactly where they left off after years of quiet, as if no time has passed at all. The quality of connection is not determined by its continuity, but by its truth, not by its speed, but by its substance. A single conversation where you are truly seen and heard matters more than 100 exchanges of small talk, more than 1,000 messages that say nothing at all. This is easy to forget in the age of instant everything. We have been taught to interpret silence as absence, delay as disinterest, the pause as the end. But what if we have been reading it wrong? What if the pause is not the opposite of connection, but part of its rhythm? What if true intimacy includes not just the moments of contact, but the trust that holds steady through the moments of space? The emotional battery is real. The need to sometimes withdraw and recharge is not a flaw in human design, but a feature. The wisdom of a system that knows it cannot pour endlessly without refilling, cannot speak without also listening, cannot give without also receiving. The need to sometimes withdraw and recharge is not a flaw in human design, but a feature. The wisdom of a system that knows it cannot pour endlessly without refilling, cannot speak without also listening, cannot give without also receiving. For the person who waits there is an invitation to interpret the silence with generosity, to assume struggle rather than rejection, to offer patience as an act of faith. And for both, there is the recognition that the problem is not personal failure, but systemic overload, not individual weakness, but a collective exhaustion born from trying to maintain too many connections too intensely across too many platforms all at once. Perhaps the most radical act in this age of constant contact is learning when not to contact, when to let someone rest, when to trust that they will return when they are able. Perhaps true friendship is not measured by how quickly someone responds, but by the grace with which you wait, the compassion with which you interpret their absence, the steadiness of your presence when they finally find their way back to words. The message will eventually be answered, or it will not. Either way, your worth remains unchanged. The relationship will find its own rhythm, or it will reveal itself to be more fragile than you hoped. But you cannot force connection by demanding response. You cannot create intimacy through guilt. You can only offer your words into the space between you and trust that they landed somewhere that matters, even if the reply does not come in the time frame you expected. And when the silence finally breaks, when the notification arrives and the conversation resumes, there is a choice in how you meet it, with resentment for the wait, or with relief at the return, with questions about the delay, or with gratitude for the reconnection. The choice you make in that moment shapes everything that follows. In the end, perhaps love and friendship are not found in the conversations that never stop, but in the trust that endures through the ones that pause. In the knowing that even after the longest silence, even after days or weeks of unanswered messages, the other person is still there, still real, still holding a space for you in their overwhelmed heart. And perhaps that understanding, that patience, that faith in the invisible thread is the most complete reply of all. The silence was never empty. It was always full of what neither of you had the words to say. I am tired, I am trying, I am still here, and now you know how to listen.